So, Paddy, we will talk today about what we know in a sad and shocking story, which is the death of Ann Widdecombe, a prominent politician for decades, and then somebody who came into everybody's lives. And this story began as terribly sad news about a woman in her late 70s who had passed away and had been found at home dead. But then it developed into something much more sinister, with the police saying there would be a murder inquiry.
So it was delivered in two sections in the news yesterday. The morning news, she died. Tributes on the radio and on the television said this unique character, she'd gone from politics to the living room via Strictly and via some heartfelt beliefs. She was one of the people who brightened the nation, said the tributes. And then the police said, we're going to have a news conference. Then the police said they was doing a murder investigation. Then the news conference came, at which they said there'd been an arrest. Then this morning, the suspect had been released. So we're back to where we were. A suspect unidentified at large in the suspected murder of Ann Widdecombe. And we'll talk about that and also your scoop.
So we went to number 11 Downing Street yesterday to sit down with Rachel Reeves, the chancellor, in what will probably, in all likelihood, be her last big interview in that job. And she's been someone, not just who's been on the front line of politics in the last 2 years as Keir Starmer's government has sort of ebbed away, but also she was an absolutely critical part of Labour's return to office. Obviously, she's had a huge influence over what's happened in the economy in this country, how we all live and breathe and experience the real life finances of the UK in the 2020s. So we'll talk a bit about what she had to say on this Saturday's episode of Newscast.
Hello, it's Paddy in the studio.
And it's Laura in the studio.
And it is a very grim piece of news. Ann Widdecombe has been killed. The police have launched a murder investigation and they are remaining open-minded on the question of the motive. They said in the news conference it's not terror. They said that they did not believe it was politically motivated, but the exact quote is of interest. They have no information to believe that it is a politically motivated crime.
And we should say we're recording this at 1:10 on Saturday lunchtime, because obviously this is the kind of story that could change very, very quickly. And there have already been lots of events, if you like, in the short life of this terrible story. She was found dead on Thursday. On Friday, a suspect was arrested, a white male, but then who was released this morning on Saturday morning. So the police have already had to go back on what they said yesterday, which was they weren't looking for anybody else. Now, of course, there is a manhunt and a suspect we presume to be at large.
There's a very large police presence in the village where Anne lived on the edge of Dartmoor. She loved the peace and quiet and tranquility there. And there are many photographs of her relishing her life there, and that she made no secret. She didn't hide herself away. She was part of village life. And the way the news broke has mystified some journalists, because when it was announced, the management team, who've subsequently said they were devastated, did not say there'd been any foul play. Neither did the police. Everything changed on Friday afternoon at about between 3 and 4. So the whole thing took on an extra horror for the country. Now, when you get to the heart of it, Samuel has emailed to say he's a newscaster. I wonder if, given the sad news about the death of my friend Ann Widdecombe, you may reflect on how politicians are portrayed and perceived. I fear that tropes and caricature unhelpfully stigmatise politicians, and the lack of nuance that any individual deserves. It puts off many a good person who may consider entering politics. Anne can best be remembered in her own words, all I do is what I think is right and leave the rest to God. He's worried about the motivation for entering politics. So we won't link it. We don't know.
We don't know.
But we do know that she was, in her time, she was caricatured.
She absolutely was caricatured. And she was caricatured as somebody who was, if you think back to the era when she became prominent, it was still quite unusual to see women in big jobs in politics. So if you think that, for me, that's been part of the context on my mind. So it was relatively unusual in her time in government in the early 90s as part of the Conservative government then. Having women ministers out and about anyway was quite an unusual thing. Then to have somebody who was incredibly outspoken, incredibly candid, very strong, very firm, quite caustic perhaps sometimes, and who had views that many, many people objected to, but it was quite unapologetic in sharing them, would never sort of deviate, but also was always and relished being up for the fight, and wasn't disliked by having trenchant views. You know, sort of quite the opposite in a way. People across the political spectrum had a real soft spot for her, and I suppose her strong views were articulated in a way in a different era. Yeah. When politicians could have strong views and not necessarily be completely vilified for having them. And that, I think, is something that has changed. So although we should be clear, as you have been, we don't know anything about the motivation for this attack. We know that the police have now said they think she was attacked 24 hours before she was found. But that shadow of political motivations, of course, is on everybody's mind in politics because of the appalling killing of Joe Cox, because of the appalling killing of David Amos, because of the many, many threats which frontline politicians live with now, which is, we can say out loud, that is not a good feature of modern politics. Yeah. It is a terrible thing that people who put themselves forward for public life find that's accompanied so often, all too often, by threats and potential danger.
Yes, and if Samuel in the newscaster is asking, do I personally think we should disagree better? Yes.
Yes. It's also a situation, though, whether it's somebody who had a massive political profile, but a massive also profile sort of as a celebrity, if you like.
Do you
went on
her?
reality shows.
Did you meet her?
I do remember her. And I remember, you know, as a young political correspondent, sort of, you know, making my way and cutting my teeth, that she was always terribly courteous, great fun, quite caustic, perhaps sometimes, but somebody who had utter conviction in what she was saying. And we don't always have that in modern politicians. You know, sometimes politicians are so concerned about sticking to a script because they have to, if they're part of a government sometimes. Also just because they're sort of worried other times about how far they can go on various issues. Or you might more unkindly argue because sometimes they don't know what they think. Right. And she absolutely did. And she was always pretty candid, pretty open, and if caustic, but she'd also had a sort of second lease of political life, of course, because she joined the Brexit Party and was an MEP. So she had this sort of two-phase career, if you like, a long period as a Conservative politician, then a kind of step back. She left Parliament in 2010, but she joined the Brexit Party in 2019, became an MEP, and then, of course, was actually Reform's spokesperson on justice issues and was a big figure in the Reform movement.
I was just revisiting one of the interviews I did with her, and I was reminded just how very robust she was and good-natured she was in arguments. You couldn't upset her by saying a different thing.
So how did you find her then? Because you must, I'm sure she did the reviews on Broadcasting House so on many times over the years.
Yes, I mean, I was just reviewing an interview I did with her about the proroguing of Parliament.
Mm-hmm. Right, Boris Johnson tried to shut up Parliament rather than allow them to stop him leaving the EU without a deal back in 2019.
That's right.
Another long hot summer.
Yeah, and she was saying the media was getting too excited about this. And I said to her, well, hang on a minute, I found a clip of you in Parliament saying that the Labour front bench was too powerful. And she laughed as if to say, you've done your homework. She was very forgiving about it. She didn't feel that she'd been trapped. And so to our newscaster who's written saying he's a friend, and to all of the people who would count as a friend, we send obviously commiserations.
And just a reminder, we're recording this, it's now 1:20 on Saturday lunchtime. And whenever you are listening right across the BBC, there'll be updates on that important and sad story.
So one thing that isn't going to change is your recorded interview with Rachel Reeves, which we can preview because you've come here with shop window sort of attractions from this interview. And it's another fabulous interview. I've been waiting to hear Rachel Reeves in interview, and you've secured it.
Oh, that's interesting, have you? So you are, because it's a funny thing when you have a handover of government, how interested are people in the perspectives of those who are leaving, or is everybody actually just interested in what's coming down the track. So I'm pleased that at least one listener and viewer will be interested.
Because I think
in
she's been playing her cards in a really intriguing way, because she's been flashing her headlights at Andy Burnham. She's never sounded churlish. She's sounded like she's auditioning for a job, even the same job.
That's interesting. And she was one of those MPs that rushed to be in the Burnham selfie. And she was in the Burnham selfie, but not in Downing Street for Keir Starmer's resignation speech. And that was just interesting to me. I mean, Rachel Reeves is a canny politician, and she was much more political than her next door neighbour, Keir Starmer, without question. But I think we forget sometimes, partly because we haven't seen very much of Rachel Reeves in the last year, that she was absolutely intrinsic to the Starmer project. He made her his shadow chancellor in 2021. The whole focus of her and her team was, could they rebuild Labour's credibility so that the country would trust the party with their money? You know, that incoming team, the people around Starmer saw a massive job that they had to do, because they believed that Labour had completely ditched their economic credibility under the Jeremy Corbyn project. And it was Rachel Reeves, following Annalise Dodds, who was the first Shadow Chancellor, who made it her sort of mission, really, before Starmer invented the mission. She made it her mission to restore Labour's reputation. And she spent years, before the general election, 3 years going around the city, having breakfast and dinners and all the rest, nicking some of the pastries, she once admitted to, because she doesn't like waste. Yeah, she doesn't like waste. So at the end of city breakfast, she used to instruct her team to put the pastries in their handbags. And she coughed to it once on the telly. So I think her role in just getting Labour back into power is so huge. And even on that alone, she has a sort of place in history. Then, of course, she was the first female chancellor. She's been in charge in number 11 at a time of huge turmoil around the world. But also then as one of the, key architects of Labour's return to power. Also, she's somebody who bears responsibility for lots of the things that went wrong.
Because do you remember when Andy Burnham went on Reddit?
Yes.
I posted a question.
Did you?
Under the handle I am Paddy O'Connell, saying, will you be the first Prime Minister to sack the first female Chancellor?
Did he answer you?
He did not.
It's miraculous he didn't pick to answer that question, isn't it? What a surprise.
She's got advice for him.
She has advice for him. So there's lots of things in our interview. And when we play it all tomorrow, I do urge you newscasters to listen to it all, because she's a really important historical figure. And it's interesting to hear her talk generally about her reflections in time. But the thing that stood out to me is she laid out a very careful warning to Andy Burnham, essentially about knowing what it was he wanted to do. Deciding what he wants to do, having a proper plan before he walks through the number 10 door. Hint, hint, maybe me and my next door neighbour didn't really, and they found that governing was harder than they had expected it to be. And she wasn't saying, I'm worried that Andy doesn't know what he's doing, because she still wants to have a job in government, although we don't expect her to stay as the Chancellor. But she did very carefully, basically, I was going to say drop that hint. It wasn't dropping a hint at all. She was warning him, decide what you want to do and then stick to it once you walk through the shiny black door.
I think it is perfectly reasonable for people to have ambition. And Andy has never shied away from the fact that he wanted at some point to leave the Labour Party. And I want him to be ready for that, because I want him to be a success, and I am sure he will be. But it is important that when Andy walks through that door, that he has a worked through plan, because governing is hard in Britain, and lots of challenges and shocks will come his way. And what is really important is that him and his team are really clear about what they want to achieve. As those shocks come along, he needs to stay laser focused on those things that have always motivated him, have always driven him, and are the reason why he wants to lead our great country.
Well, look, I'm so pleased you've got this interview, because everything in this one soundbite is of a great interest. And the other thing they did in their manifesto was box themselves in. It's now widely agreed by people across the spectrum by saying they would not pull the three main levers which the state pulls when it needs money. That's what the state does.
Absolutely.
So Andy Burnham has committed to staying with the manifesto. And furthermore, he's boxed himself in again by saying he's not going to visit the triple lock.
That's true. What he hasn't said, though, is that he won't get rid of council tax and do a different kind of tax. He hasn't said that he won't increase capital gains or the so-called mansion tax and tax on property. And he has said that there's room for manoeuvre on tax. So that is all interesting, but we'll see what happens. In terms of Reeves, though, you're right. I mean, that's one of the absolute central criticisms, is that she moved into number 11, having been so eager to win that she basically ruled out anything that might sound like it was nasty to the electorate. But it meant once she was in there, she didn't have many ways of getting to the ATM. So therefore, she put up taxes on businesses, which businesses hated. She also tried to get rid of winter fuel allowance for millions of pensioners, which her party and lots of the public hated. And that sapped away at her political authority, which then meant when it came to trying to make changes to welfare, she didn't necessarily have the political clout to win that argument. That said, it was so obvious that she really, really wants to be remembered for sorting out the disaster that she found in her version of world events when she walked through that door. And she said sort of repeatedly, look, if you look at the big picture, I walked in and it was a disaster, and I brought stability back to the UK economy, which had been missing in the run up to Labour getting back into power. And it was really striking that that was what the message she wanted to be conveyed. Essentially, on the big calls, hear me everyone, Rachel Reeves says, I got it right.
I kept saying during the general election campaign, and since I've become Chancellor, you have to build growth and change on that rock of stability and trust that I've managed to return to our economy. But people are impatient for change. I'm impatient for change, and I totally get that people want to see their lives changed faster, and that will be the job for Andy Burnham when he becomes a Prime Minister of our country in just over a week's time. But he's becoming Prime Minister because of the majority that we secured, and I also know, because of the work that I have done, Andy will take over an economy that is much stronger than the one that I inherited from the Conservatives just 2 years ago.
Well, I mean, I'm just enjoying every bit of this. So here on Newscast, we've had a very pugnacious Jeremy Hunt, who was the last Conservative Chancellor.
Yes.
And he would dispute everything that Rachel Reeves has just said.
Yes.
What we can say impartially is that the IMF was revising up British growth last week,
yes,
before the latest strangulation of the Strait of Hormuz. So Labour has got a growth argument to make.
It does. And if the International Monetary Fund, which are, you know, the kind of international super brains when it comes to the economy, are saying actually the UK is doing better than some other countries, then Rachel Reeves, of course, is going to put that feather in her cap and say, look at my lovely cap. Didn't I do well?
Gordon Brown's favourite thing. We're doing better than France. We're doing better than Germany. We're doing better than Italy.
Exactly. And she would say government borrowing costs have come down. She would say that inflation has come down from its peak. She would say that there have been lots of interest rate cuts in the time that she has been in charge. All of those things are true. However, her detractors would say that the debt of this country will be higher. It was forecast to be higher in 2029 than it was in 2024 when she moved in. Her detractors would say that growth is still measly, even though the economy is growing. And they would say that mistakes that she made politically, you know, and critics on the left would say that she didn't have the political nous, as one of them said to me, to see that winter fuel, welfare, those things were going to be a disaster with the Labour Party, that she sapped her own authority. And I just want to read you one assessment, which I think is sort of the middle of the road, because I talked to a lot of people on Thursday before we did the interview, and the sort of city sources and political sources and people to kind of try and, you know, get a picture of what people's views of Reeves were. And I just want to read you one of the comments, because I think it sort of lands in the middle of the road. And they said, here we are. She arrived thinking the economy would probably bounce back and all she'd have to do is shovel money into public services. She spent a lot of time painting a grim picture of the inheritance in the election, expecting things would brighten up quickly. But by the time she found things were different with tight public finances, mushrooming welfare and the economy stuck in a low growth trap, she'd used up most of her political capital and was unable to win the big arguments. I think her instincts are generally okay, but by the time she figured out the right things to do, it was too late. Now, newscasters, let us know what you think of Rachel Reeves' time as Chancellor. There are lots of different views, but that was one that kind of sort of resonated with me, that people would say, yeah, okay, she found a disaster. She did kind of right the ship. But after that, it just didn't unfold in the way that she would have wanted to. And that just did. And she was exposed. I mean, I think she found herself kind of exposed in a way that it didn't all go according to plan. But I think quite in a way, there was an echo of Keir Starmer's interview with Henry last week. She's not ready to say, I made loads of mistakes. No. She's saying, Andy's going to get a great or a much better economy. That's down to me and my hard work. And Labour in government isn't over. It's the end of a chapter, but on we go, rather than saying, you know, it's all terrible and what a disaster and we got booted out and how embarrassing is that?
And also, I mean, one of the big arguments for Britain is the growing welfare bill. So we want people to have a safety net. And that bill for the safety net is growing and our population is ageing.
Yes.
So the pension bill, which is triple locked, is going to grow because of the good news that more people are living longer. We want our relatives to live longer and we wish them a happy retirement. More of them are going to do it. And that currently it's triple locked. So that bill is going up, everybody, no matter what we do at the moment.
Exactly.
And then the welfare bill is going up as well. So more people are claiming more benefits. And this is a central argument. And it split the Labour Party completely in the first term of Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer's trying.
It absolutely did. And we had just in the last few days, the Timms review came back, having looked at whether PIP, one of the disability benefits or long-term ill health benefits, worked. His conclusion was this benefit doesn't basically work at all. And we've got to kind of come up with another plan. It was quite similar to Alan Milburn's report about youth unemployment and young people being parked on benefits rather than being helped into work properly. Both these big pieces of work come forward and say, oh, look, there's a big problem over here. But it's not a problem that Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer have shown that they were able to address for all sorts of different reasons. Now, in comes then massive question mark. Will Andy Burnham be able to address it? But that question of welfare is, you know, that is going to be one of the political questions of our time for at least the next kind of 2, 5, 10 years. And it takes us back to the debt problem. Now, if you're as sad as me and you look at the charts of this, of where the UK debt is expected to be in the next, not just the next kind of few years, but the next 5, 10, 20, 30 years, if you had to describe it, it's like a hockey stick. I mean, it just goes absolutely up. So if you were sad as I am and you read the Office for Budget Responsibility latest fiscal reports, it says the UK is on a path on debt that is unsustainable, to use their words. It says unsustainable. Now, whatever political stripe you're on, that is a fact that the forecasters who look at the state of the economy say the way that this country spends money and earns money is not going to add up in the decades to come unless a government of any, whatever persuasion, does something quite radical. Either finds a magic way of getting the economy to go gangbusters and grow at a massive rate, or cuts lots of things from the state, or charges more tax. And you can't do it any other way. Or you could borrow even more, but, you know, the debt's already so enormous.
Servicing our debt is costing us £100 billion a year.
It's a bit like my credit card.
Yeah, Andy Burnham, are you listening? And so welcome. It's a bit like we said, we were right before the general election.
We're often wrong.
We were right. We said whoever wins this general election is inheriting a very, very difficult place to govern. We can go back, we can play it. We said it. And then what happened is they played a bad hand badly, say their own party who have changed the leader.
Yeah.
They say, you played the hand so badly, Keir Starmer, 4/5 of Labour MPs are going to vote publicly to get rid of you.
Yeah. And that's the thing. And it's interesting from a human point of view as well. At what point are Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer willing to sort of publicly really absorb or confront the failures of their project? Because although she's so keen to say, I left the economy in a better shape than it was when I walked through the number 11 door, the fact that they're getting the heave-ho is the evidence that it went badly wrong. So there's no other way around that. Of course, it's intriguing to imagine what Rachel Reeves might do next, you know.
Totally.
And nobody has a clue, frankly.
You do. I bet you do.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. You know, Andy Burnham Well, I don't know. Look, there's one, I think, very unlikely scenario, but there is a scenario where he says, actually, do you know what? Let's keep her because market stability. The last couple of years, whenever there was a suggestion that Rachel Reeves might have been going to get a HEFO or resign, the markets really, really wobbled because they saw her as being somebody who responsible, who wasn't going to come in and start just writing checks all over the place. So there's I think there's a tiny chance of that, but there is a scenario. I think it's tricky to see that she would just be expected to return to the backbenches, having publicly given Burnham her support, and his team obviously are conscious of the financial markets. But I don't know, because once you start giving out jobs, I mean, I don't know. And it's been quite, as a reporter, it's been quite an impressive feature, actually, of Burnham's team, Burnham's real inner core team, if you like, that they are really managing not to engage in speculation about who will get what job. And people have sort of a little bit given up the parlour game that was running pretty hard in Westminster a fortnight ago about who the Chancellor will be. He keeps saying, like, no one knows. And I was talking to one of his close allies yesterday who said to me, I genuinely don't know. No. Should I believe them? I don't know. Newscasters fill in the blanks. But they are managing to keep it very tight.
One thing that she is remembered for, and this again goes to our earlier conversation about how politics is a really rough game. Mm-hmm. It's not really a game. Politics is rough.
Rough life. It's
rough life.
Yeah.
Yeah. She wept in the Commons. It was uncomfortable for everybody. Mm-hmm. And it was also marked by the fact that because Keir Starmer was on his feet, he couldn't really see, as he didn't really know what was happening to him. And it's just one of the things when you try and address in your mind about this extraordinary news cycle, a new Labour government with a massive majority then lost the support of its own MPs in a sort of slow motion coup. And we now know 12 months ago, Andy Burnham and his friends were plotting to take over the top job. And one of the things that people at the centre, your guest, wept.
Yeah, and it was an extraordinary moment and a kind of awful, it was only kind of when I watched with your hands over your face, you sort of couldn't look away. And she said several times in our conversation, and it did kind of, it was noticeable how many times she said it. She said, governing is hard. She kept saying governing is hard. It's hard in this country, it's harder in other countries in this era. Governing is hard. And of course, I wanted to ask her, well, what's the hardest bit been? And she referred to that day. But actually, she managed to turn it into a bit of a joke. And I think people would want to know what the hardest bit's been and what the best bit has been. So what's the hardest? Is there a moment where you really felt the big strain? What's the hardest thing been?
Well, I would say don't cry on national television. That was probably my toughest moment, or perhaps even tougher, seeing the photos of me crying on national television on the front page of pretty much every newspaper the following day. But even that day was better than the 14 years in opposition when I was powerless to change anything in this country.
I don't want to pry about it unnecessarily, but you raised it. Would you tell people what was going on? Because there was a rumour you'd had a fight with the speaker and something else had happened. But
it was a tough day, and we all have tough days. I talked to my friends, and people wrote to me saying, that happened to me once. And the only difference is that I was on the telly. And so, people had difficult days at work, and that was one for me. But yeah, that's where you should cry, not on the television. So that was my toughest day.
It's funny there, because also Rachel Reeves there gives a flash actually of what she is like when the camera's not on. She has had this very kind of armour-plated chancellor image. But then over the years, you sort of catch her at a much more human moment, and that kind of gave a flash of it. She's somebody actually who her staff always talk of with sort of great fondness. She's somebody who is actually not completely different, but she's notably different when there isn't a camera on her. And there have been only a few moments over the years where you've seen a sort of flash of that humour or emotion. And other ones I remember when she walked into the Treasury for the first time and the cameras were there and she had this huge cheer from the staff and she talked about what it meant to her to be the first female chancellor and just this sort of beam. She was cheered by the civil servants, really welcoming her with huge warmth. And she gave this massive sort of megawatt smile. And I just thought, you never see that. So it'll be fascinating to see what she does next.
Yes, totally. And I think this interview gives us a very strong signal that she wants it to go well with Andy Burnham. It would be so easy to sulk, which is what Ted Heath did when he was displaced by Margaret Thatcher. It was called the longest sulk in political history. He's much loved, Ted Heath, by Conservatives who remember him, but that is what it was described as. And she's not doing that. She's really suggesting she'll work with him.
She is. And she was saying, it's important he knows what he wants to do. But she wasn't saying he has to be worried about the markets and I don't think that he's responsible. So she was warning him, know what you want to do, be careful, don't chuck our economic credibility away that she worked so hard to create, as she would argue.
She has argued it.
But she did it in a way that will sort of come across as, it's not a kind of dramatic shot across the bows. Definitely a warning, but not destructive. And I think this takes us to a really, really big question for the Labour Party in the next week, in the next couple of months, in the next year. Are they able genuinely to work together and say, we all have a stake in making this Burnham premiership a success, and therefore, if you don't get a job, or if you don't like what he's doing, or you find the whole man from Manchester shtick a bit annoying already, are you going to button your lip because you want everybody to succeed? Or are you going to start whispering to journalists? Are you going to start whispering to each other? And are you, in a very unlikely scenario, but not impossible, in 6 months and things are tricky, are you going to start saying near a microphone, oh, you know what, we should have had a contest. His ideas were never properly tested. This is a big question for Labour. Do they button it and get on with it and get on with each other? Or do they do what the Tories did, which is not just change leader, but then before the leader had even unpacked their pants in number 10, start winding each other up about how it was all terribly unfair and it was all wrong and they had all the wrong ideas. And that's a profound question for Labour at this moment. Are they going to, as a unit of people, be able to hold it all together and find a way of, not every single person because it's politics, but of the vast majority of them pulling together in the same direction? We'll see.
It's a great place to end our discussion about Your Scoop with Rachel Reeves, which will be on BBC One from 9 o'clock and on every BBC platform, I imagine.
I hope so. I certainly hope so. Also, hot news about the Reeves cat is going to be in that as well. And I know that, especially for you, Paddy, cat lover.
Now, also, we can clear something up.
Yes.
Which is about, there was a mystery over whether President Trump had played golf with Harry Kane.
Yes, it sounds like a fever dream.
And Harry Kane has confirmed that it happened. But also what's so interesting about Harry Kane speaking is he's got great natural diplomacy, because Donald Trump is, even during the World Cup, polarising opinion about the whole red card stramash. And Harry Kane, think of the pressure this man is under, comes up, I think, with one of the most elegant diplomatic remarks about the president.
Absolutely. So Harry Kane said, we played about 18 months ago. He invited me to play when I was down in Palm Beach. So when the president invites you somewhere, it was pretty surreal just to meet him and play golf. His golf is pretty good, to be honest. I hope I can play golf as well as him when I'm his age, that's for sure. I'm grateful he invited me down to play. Harry Kane for Andy Burnham's American ambassador?
Well, I mean, that's exactly the way. That's exactly what you say when you're next to Donald Trump.
I thought you said that's exactly what you say when you want to be the next British ambassador.
Well, I think we can rule that out.
House.
There is confusion about what roles people are going to play in the Andy Burnham administration, but
don't rule anything out these days, Paddy. Actually, someone said to me this morning, David Miliband wants to be the US ambassador. There's lots of speculation about whether or not he's going to come back to the Burnham fold.
We can't. I'm going to change. Not another one.
Another one.
We're going to have another US ambassador.
I don't know. Someone said he was going to be education section. I mean, there is so much guessing going on at the moment. I don't know.
Okay, so thank you very much for listening, and see you tomorrow.
Bye.
Goodbye.